If data management is slowing down your business, you need the Intuit ERP. If one entity is here, and one here, and one here, and one here, you need the Intuit ERP. If scaling your business feels like starting over, you need the Intuit ERP. Intuit Enterprise Suite is the AI-native ERP solution that consolidates, migrates, and automates, all in one place. Learn more at intuit.com/ERP.
And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth. A great day as this great nation responds in a somewhat confused way to the big speech last night. It was certainly big, not necessarily in terms of its importance or its significance, but big in terms of its length. It was the longest State of the Union or State of the Union equivalent speech to a joint session of Congress ever delivered by an American president. And he beat the last record holder for the longest speech, who was Donald J. Trump. So the question that is left over for people who watched the speech and then watched parts of it again and looked at it and analyzed it and considered it, the question is left over, and that question is, okay, which is it? Is America in the midst of a golden age where everything is going right, the economy is humming along, we are building up new opportunities for Americans, the standard of living is rising, the standard of crime is going down, we are living in the golden age that President Trump promised during the campaign? Or is the nation being torn apart by all kinds of evildoers who involve bloody crimes, taking children away from their parents and trying to change their gender in terms of particularly nightmarish descriptions that were given again and again and again in the last parts of the speech about cruelty and dysfunction and horror. Is America doing great, in other words, or is America faltering and splitting apart? Now, part of this is impossible to even consider without looking at the context. And the context shows that in poll after poll after poll, in every survey, in Republican-leaning surveys, even like Rasmussen, a clear majority of Americans believe we are headed in the wrong direction. They don't like the direction or the circumstances of the country. People are concerned about a dysfunctional Congress, about a dysfunctional government, about an inability to even agree on basic facts. For instance, President Trump's boast last night that not a single, not even one illegal immigrant has entered this country under his leadership. And when it comes to fact-checking, this is a pretty easy one to fact-check. And no, it's not exactly the situation. There was a good piece in The New Yorker by Susan Glasser, who wrote it in a big hurry after the speech. But she writes, USA, USA rang through the hall. It was both the most theatrical moment in Trump's speech and the most revealing. Did he think he was personally responsible for winning that gold medal? Probably. What is she talking about? She's talking about the beginning of the parade of guests who were introduced by President Trump. There was a dramatic highlight where the U.S. men's hockey team, which won unexpected gold medals beating Canada, came onto the Chamber of Congress to tremendous applause, bipartisan applause. And if only he had ended his speech there, writes Susan Glasser, because everyone was standing up in honor of the hockey players. And by the way, one thing that is fascinating to talk about here is that in hailing this great success of America winning the gold medal in hockey, and both for the women's team, which wasn't there tonight, not because the women did not want to honor the president or they didn't want to be involved or anything like that. It was a scheduling matter. Apparently, the women's team is going to be honored at the White House separately. So we still are separating men and women when it comes to hockey gold medals, but both men and women won gold medals. Terrific. Why is this not equivalent to the 46 years ago, the Miracle on Ice, where America beat the Soviet Union? The answer is because the Soviet Union in 1980, when that Miracle on Ice occurred in the Winter Olympics, that was a period of time in the midst of the Cold War. No just ice reference, but the Cold War that divided the world between the evil empire of the Soviet Union and the United States. And we beat the Soviet Union. Okay, this time we beat Canada. And I was actually surprised and relieved that President Trump didn't make some kind of crack or remark when he introduced the hockey team and gave them their honor as giving the goalie of that hockey team a Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is interesting because I'm not sure how much the hockey victory really does contribute to national freedom and to things that are supposed to be honored by that highest of all civilian medals. In any event, it's very different to beat the Soviet Union than to beat Canada. And at least the president didn't rub it in that we were beating Canada, where the national sport really is hockey. And he didn't make some kind of crack as, okay, now are you ready to become the 51st state that you have lost the gold medal for hockey? All right. Susan Glasser writes, if only the president had ended his speech there. The rest of the address turned out to be a reprise of Trump's American Carnage greatest hits, a bloody mess of murderous illegal aliens. And we're going to get them all the hell out of here fast, he promised. Somali pirates who ransacked Minnesota and, quote, all the stolen and rigged bad things that Democrats had done to the country. Above all, he talked about Democrats trying to cheat and to destroy our electoral integrity that we have maintained in this country for 250 years. That was Trump in dark mode. His only other setting for one of these speeches, which made a certain amount of sense. Who else but Trump's most fervent supporters were still listening by this point, long into the speech? The speech was nearly 2 hours long. The president seemed almost relieved that there were enough Democrats who had not walked out of the room in disgust for him to taunt. These people are crazy, he said. I'm telling you, they are crazy. Now, according to reports that have not been completely verified, but I believe that they're probably true, the original copy of the speech that was handed out to the press included those passages, they are crazy, these people are really crazy, and pointing to the Democrats who were left in the hall. So in other words, President Trump expected that the Democrats would be outraged in a lot of what he talked about, where he talked about what it was that the Democrats were determined on doing, how they were determined on cheating, how the only thing, and this has been fact-checked, where he claimed the only way Democrats can win in America is by cheating, by allowing people who are illegal immigrants and encouraging them to vote, which is against the law, and where even the Heritage Foundation, as people have pointed out in fact-checking, the Conservative Heritage Foundation, which is very strongly supportive of President Trump, has indicated that the idea of illegal immigrants, undocumented immigrants, actually casting votes is extremely rare. That over the last 20 years, there have been about 85 convictions nationwide of false voting by people who aren't citizens of the United States? We'll be speaking with Andy McCarthy coming up on the president's speech, on tariffs, and the Supreme Court, and more. Coming up on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, it is a pleasure always to welcome Andy McCarthy of the National Review. He's a senior fellow at National Review Institute, an NR contributing editor, and he has also served in the past with great distinction as a U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York, helping to put terrorists away and getting them off the streets and ending their threatening aspect to the American public. His most recent column, How Rich for Trump to Impugn the Supreme Court as Swayed by Foreign Interests. Andy, you watched the speech last night, the big speech by President Trump for his State of the Union. Were you at all surprised to see him cordially shaking hands with some of the Supreme Court justices, 4 of them who were there at the speech, including people who had helped to hand him his biggest judicial loss on the issue of emergency tariffs?
Well, I wish I had had a little money on it, Michael, because my bet was that there would only be 3 justices who showed up. So I think it's not just that he crossed paths with them, but that so few of them were at the event. Where I would have lost was I predicted that Justice Barrett, who came in for particular venom from the president, would not be there. I actually expected that Chief Justice Roberts, who, as I understand it, has made every State of the Union address since he's been the Chief Judicial Officer of the United States, which is an important institutional constitutional office. I understand he's been at every one since like 2005 or 2006. And I wasn't surprised. I actually thought that Kagan and Kavanaugh would be there, but what surprised me was that Justice Barrett came, which I think is a credit to her.
No, there's no doubt. And again, everything was cordial and respectful. The president wasn't respectful when he impugned the Supreme Court as swayed by foreign interests. What did the president have in mind when he suggested that our highest judicial officers in the country were actually agents or slaves to foreign ideologies and interests?
Michael, I'm not crazy about the implication that I know what's on the president's mind. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable going there, but I have to assume, let's be as objectively as I can, that since we were talking about foreign charges, we're talking here specifically about tariffs, which are exactions that are made in connection with goods that are imported into the United States, and that the ramifications of tariffs and tariff rates are major negotiations between the United States and foreign powers. I assume what the president was saying, and I think this was more rhetorical than thoughtful, is that the court has cut his legs out from under him in terms of the extortionate way that he wants to use the what he sees as his lawful ability to willy-nilly announce tariffs, raise them, lower them at the drop of the hat, and even apparently if his feelings are hurt because somebody, spoke in a way to him that he regarded as rude, so, that generates a tariff. I don't think – I mean, I really hope this is true. I don't think the president was saying that the Supreme Court had been paid off. I just think in the context – it caused him to say something, let's say, regrettable about foreign powers.
Okay, yeah, given what is going on here now, the president is trying to say that when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to any of the countries that are potentially hostile to the United States, it's better to use tariffs as a weapon than it is to actually go to war. Do you think that's a reasonable attitude to take? And is it one that is defensible?
I don't think so, Michael. You know, it reminds me in a lot of ways of the straw man that President Obama was fond of using, which was this idea to justify and rationalize the Iran nuclear deal, the JCPOA. What he would say is that basically the choice was to either cut this deal or we were in all-out war with Iran, which seemed to be pretty foolish because we didn't have the deal and we had been in tensions with Iran for 40 years, but we hadn't been in all-out war. So the suggestion that that was the only, that there were two choices and that was it, I thought was just complete fiction. And I don't see this as any different. I think that there's an array of ways to deal with Iran. I'm an Iran hawk and have been certainly since I've been publicly appearing and writing, and I was one, to the extent that mattered when I was a prosecutor dealing with jihadist terrorists in the 90s through the 9/11 attacks, and was very cognizant of what Iran's role was. I've always been in favor of regime change, but I've never thought that it was necessary to do an all-out attack on Iran in order to achieve that. I thought that we have many levers of power in the United States government, and when they're all turned in the same direction against a regime, that can be very powerful.
That's another thing that I think was surprising to people about the nearly 2-hour speech by President Trump, an hour and 47 minutes. This State of the Union speech did not include a lot of focus on Iran. Why not?
I think because it raises the issue, which I happen to be writing about at the moment, which is whether the president ought to go to Congress or not. If he raised that with Congress, I think the question that naturally arises is, since Congress has the war power in the Constitution, why not go to Congress and get authorization? There are not only constitutional but prudential reasons to do it. He doesn't want to do it, so I guess he just as soon avoid the subject.
And there is evidence that there was bipartisan positive reaction to some of his confrontational rhetoric about Iran. So it's a complicated issue. The columns by Andy McCarthy that are extraordinarily illuminating and relevant and important and impactful are posted at our website at michaelmedved.com. Andy, would you guess we go to war or not?
I think it'll be done in phases. I believe there'll be an attack, but it might not be a conclusive attack.
I appreciate your perspective always. Andrew McCarthy, more about reactions to President Trump's speech, positive and negative. That and more coming up on The Medved Show.
The greatest show on God's green earth.
The whole thing is a scam, and it's a shame, and it's a disgrace to our country.
The Michael Medved Show.
I do not believe that the speech last night, all 1 hour and 47 minutes of it, which rambled on like a Eugene O'Neill play, A Long Day's Journey into Night. And it was a long day's journey into night, particularly in parts of the country, Eastern time zone. It was running very, very late indeed. But there is a literary classic that comes to mind, which is the very beginning of Charles Dickens' The Tale of Two Cities. The famous beginning of that great novel is it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And that was what President Trump did. At the beginning, toward the beginning of his speech, he said, "Our country is winning again. In fact, we're winning so much that we really don't know what to do about it. People are asking me, please, 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 Mr. President, We're winning too much. We can't take it anymore. That's what Trump said before introducing the victorious U.S. hockey team, which has done its own share of winning. But by the way, is there anyone in this entire country who believes the president is telling the truth? That people are coming up to him and saying, please, 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 Mr. President, we're winning too much. We can't take it anymore. Is that an accurate assessment or summary of what people would be saying to the President of the United States? Anyone believe that? I think it's rather difficult to believe. And then it's contradicted by the last third of the speech, which was a gallery of horrors. Rachel Maddow of MS Now actually, I think, summarized that aspect of the speech fairly well. U.S. Now's Rachel Maddow said Trump, quote, luxuriated in the descriptions of the goriest things that have ever been mentioned in any State of the Union speech. Analyzing the president's address, the longest State of the Union on record, Maddow pointed to his grisly rhetoric, much of it centered on stories about people killed by immigrants. Maddow said Trump ended up slowing down a lot, and particularly slowing down markedly for long stretches of the speech that were essentially sort of violence porn. The president talked about people being covered in blood, gushing blood pouring out of things, and people on the edge of death, she noted. He also went into graphic detail on a number of different people's injuries of various kinds, and he tried to give seemingly as much gory detail. This is an exact example of the phrase gory detail. Talking about very bloody scenes, she added. It was a sort of violently pornographic riffing that the president did very slowly throughout the back half of his speech, Rachel Maddow observed. The horrific imagery, along with the record length of the address, were Maddow's two main takeaways, she said. I think it's insightful. And why and how does all that gore and all that specificity about gushing blood and injuries and kidnapping little children to change their sexual orientation or their sex without even notifying their parents, and the horrors that he conjured up for his audience did not seem to conform to the notion that we are living in a golden age and things are better than ever before. In other words, is this the best of times or is it the worst of times? It really can't be both, can it? I mean, it seems to me a legitimate and inevitable question. The Washington Post reports that at first President Donald Trump stuck to a largely positive message, but his big speech took a turn about an hour in, according to real-time reactions from a panel of viewers convened by the Democratic firm Navigator Research. Support for Trump fell when he said Americans are winning, when he said prices were dropping, and when he mentioned tariffs. There's also this from David Frum, who is a former White House aide, one of the former and most successful State of the Union addresses came in 2001 when David Frum helped to write it. He helped to write the speech about the axis of evil that President Bush gave at a time when President Bush was riding very high in public popularity because of his decisive reaction to the horrors, the genuine horrors of the 9/11 attack. And David Frum wrote about, for The Atlantic, where he writes, he wrote about this speech and said, the speech turned reality on its head in many ways. The president, who has enriched himself and his family by more than $1 billion in his first year in office, called on Congress to clean up corruption. The president, who has collected about $175 billion in illegal tariffs, that's $175 billion in illegal tariffs from the American people, falsely told them that he had given them a great big tax cut. Well, no, the tariffs mean a very big tax increase. The president solemnly condemned political violence, the same president who ended his first term by inciting a mob to sack Congress and overturn an election. Maybe most shocking, writes David Frum, Trump demanded that members of Congress rise to agree that it's the first duty of government to protect American citizens, even as his own government, by its brutal police methods, has shot American citizens dead on the streets and then tried to deceive the country about how those Americans had been killed and why. Then, of course, there were the many misstatements of fact about the economy, about crime, and about wars and peace, many of which took the path of looking like deliberate decisions to deceive the public watching on television. And there is more on this that is fairly remarkable. There was a CNN exit poll that revealed that Trump's speech flopped among people who watched it. But what about the American people in general? Is this going to set the right tone for the Republicans defending their congressional majorities in the midterm elections that are coming up in just a few months? We will get to that, what the initial polling suggests, and play directly some of the highlights, and there were highlights, and lowlights of the almost 2-hour speech to the wary and weary American public. And what about the Democratic handling of what was presented last night? Was the governor of Virginia, the new governor of Virginia, successful as a counterpart to President Trump? We will get to that and more coming up on the Medved Show. And on the Michael Medved Show, the world is still digesting and reacting to President Trump's long speech last night. Trump set a record Tuesday night for the longest State of the Union or State of the Union speech to a joint session of Congress in U.S. history, speaking for 1 hour and 47 minutes. Before the address, he warned it's going to be a long speech. That was the most accurate statement he gave in the entire evening of speechifying. It was a very long speech. Once upon a time, Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson, reacted back in the 1700s to Paradise Lost, a literary classic. And he said, none would say it were too brief. And I haven't heard that complaint. I haven't heard about President Trump's speech last night. Nobody said, tell me more, or give us some other grisly story or horrible account that needs to inspire and engage the American public. The CNN did one of the first exit polls, and all of that was presented by Daniel Dale over at CNN, who had this to say, clip 5.
38% said they had a very positive reaction to the speech, 25% somewhat positive, 36% negative. So roughly 2/3 in the positive territory, 1/3 negative among speech watchers. How does that very positive number stack up against previous addresses? Well, look here. It's about 6 percentage points lower than Donald Trump was at with the very positive score last year. He was at 44% very positive reaction last year. This year, 38%, even though the universe of speech watchers was actually even a bit more Republican than it was last year. And we also took a look at that very positive speech reaction here compared to previous presidents in this midterm year. So in 2026, this year, tonight, 38% very positive reaction. Joe Biden 4 years ago, 41% very positive reaction. That was the year Democrats lost control of the House. You see Trump in 2018 was at 48% very positive when his party lost control of the House in his first term. So you see here, again, Donald Trump is at the bottom of this.
Okay, the one point that he made very clearly, and I think it is something that people have to understand, is when it comes to people who sit and watch the speech, who tune in for it, and then stick with it for all 1 hour and 47 minutes, those people are obviously pre-selected, self-selected, as people who are sympathetic to President Trump, who want to hear what he wants to say. People who fear President Trump and feel contempt and negativity for him, and that's a certain part of the population, are very unlikely to hear the speech. So the 38% who said that they had a very positive reaction to the speech, that is not at all surprising or particularly encouraging to President Trump. Joe Biden, right before Joe Biden lost control of the Congress, and right before Joe Biden lost control of the Congress, and before he was so weak as a candidate that he had to pull out as the Democratic representative in the presidential duel, Joe Biden got a higher rating for delivering a very positive speech than President Trump did. And Joe Biden, you may remember, was heckled a good deal by some members of the opposition party in his speech back in 2022. President Trump began on a positive note, and a particularly sunny note that was not followed up in the rest of the speech. He began by touting his tremendous successes that he believed constituted a turnaround for the ages. Here was President Trump during the State of the Union address last night, clip 7.
When I last spoke in this chamber 12 months ago, I had just inherited a nation in crisis with a stagnant economy, inflation at record levels, a wide open border, horrendous recruitment for military and police, rampant crime at home, and wars and chaos all over the world. But tonight, after just 1 year, I can say with dignity and pride that we have achieved a transformation like no one has ever seen before, and a turnaround for the ages. It is indeed a turnaround for the ages.
A turnaround for the ages. And what is an example? He gave one extremely powerful example. Part of the problem is it's simply not true, and it's profoundly misleading, and it's been fact-checked by everybody. But that didn't stop President Trump from saying that there are zero illegal immigrants who have come across the border to the United States without authorization during his full year as president. This is President Trump again from last night's State of the Union address, clip 9.
Today, our border is secure, our spirit is restored, Inflation is plummeting. Incomes are rising fast. The roaring economy is roaring like never before. And our enemies are scared. Our military and police are stacked. And America is respected again, perhaps like never before. After 4 years in which millions and millions of illegal aliens poured across our borders, totally unvetted and unchecked, we now have the strongest and most secure border in American history by far. In the past 9 months, 0 illegal aliens have been admitted to the United States.
Okay, the term admitted it's tricky here. In the fact-checking by CBS News, they write, Mr. Trump is likely referring, when he used that 0 number, to the number of immigrants released by Border Patrol after crossing the U.S.-Mexico border illegally. Over the past 9 months, U.S. Customs and Border Protection have reported 0 releases of migrants by Border Patrol along the U.S. southern border. This does not necessarily mean that every single migrant who has attempted to enter the U.S. illegally since Mr. Trump took office has been apprehended or deported. Of course, it is ridiculous to think that on a border as long as ours and as complicated as ours, that there would be not a single successful crossing. Border Patrol's numbers do not account for migrants, writes CBS, who enter the U.S. illegally, surreptitiously, without being caught by Border Patrol agents. It's unclear how many of those so-called gotaways have been recorded under the second Trump administration. In other words, if somebody's going to sneak across the border, then it's kind of tough to say that you're going to acknowledge them and count them in this regard. Look, there is much more about fact-checking and about the claim that U.S. murder rate saw its largest decline in all of recorded history, or that more people are working in the United States and working at jobs in the United States than ever before, and that all these glorious numbers are a little bit misleading. And maybe that's why only a minority of even people who watched the speech had a positive impression about it. We will get to more to promises made by the women's hockey team that wasn't there at this occasion, and why not? That and more and much more coming up in this greatest nation on God's green earth.